Hello, and welcome to this originally produced podcast from the University of Central Florida's Office of Global Perspectives and International Initiatives. I am Abigail English, GPII's Terrorism Study Intern, along with Farah Shah, the Middle East and North Africa Intern.
Joining us today is Mrs. Gretchen Welch. Gretchen served as a U.S. Foreign Service member for 32 years, with a career focused principally on management and operations. She served overseas in Pakistan, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the United Kingdom, an impressive roster. Gretchen holds a BA in International Relations from Stanford University, as well as a Diploma with Merit in Asian Art from the SOAS at the University of London. You've studied at AUC's Arabic Language Institute and currently serve on the board of several not-for-profit organizations. Welcome, Gretchen, and thank you for sitting down with us today.
It's just a pleasure to be with both of you.
We would like to open a discussion about your experience in the Foreign Service, living overseas in the Middle East, and the American University of Cairo, with whom we have a partnership with. But I'd like to start from the very beginning. When determining your career, how did you know you wanted to be a Foreign Service officer, and did you know any other women pursuing that career?
That's a great question, Abby. First of all, I wish I had known what I wanted to do with my life. I ended up in international studies, which was a new major at Stanford in the 70s. Interdisciplinary, brand new kind of consideration and focus. I ended up in international relations because they were doing an arms control simulation between the U.S. and what was then the Soviet Union. It was a quarter class, a full quarter, and they needed another woman for the American side. Literally, that's what some guys were like. You need to come and be on our team. So it was one of the most intense experiences I've ever had. You know, we got really into these negotiations. People would say, you know, can you come out and do this? Go to the football game. And like, no, we're resolving the arms control issues.
We're saving the world.
We're saving the world. So that really sparked my interest in government and in world affairs. I also spent a semester in France as a student abroad, and I realized I loved living in a country and learning the language, the culture, what they eat for breakfast, how they entertain their families and celebrate holidays. So I liked doing that almost more than traveling. I liked living in like being involved in a community, getting to know a community. Yeah. So my senior year, I took the Foreign Service exam, the GREs, the LSATs on consecutive weekends. I was the queen of filling in the bubbles and and ended up going to Washington doing an internship for my senator. My family was living in Illinois, so I worked for Senator Percy for 2.5 years.
Wow.
And I was just getting ready to go back to graduate school when the Foreign Service called. And I thought, why not?
Yeah.
Why not? So I joined. It turned out the first day of our Foreign Service class was in March 1980, and it was the day after. At the time, the U.S. hostages were in the embassy in Tehran, and the day I joined was the day after there was a failed rescue attempt. These helicopters crashed in the desert into each other, and they were not able to go save the hostages. So that was our first day, and we're kind of all looking at each other.
What a time to join the Foreign Service.
Bracing for impact. Like, what did I get myself into?
And then I volunteered to go to Pakistan. So because it had also had a tragic incident in the fall of 1979, and they'd evacuated most of the staff, and they were honestly looking for single people. And I said, okay, I'll go. And that was that. So,
that's amazing.
just the second part of your question about women, it's really interesting. I think we were 5 in my entering Foreign Service class. And one of our kind of quasi-mentors, she wasn't an official part of the program, but she was really committed to mentoring us, was a Foreign Service officer who, because she had come into the Foreign Service in probably the 60s, married a colleague and had to resign. And they changed that rule in the mid-'70s, so she had come back in. This was about 4 or 5 years before we joined. And she was really committed to supporting women in the Foreign Service. So,
Yeah,
so
that's
there
amazing.
it was not very many.
Yeah, not very many.
Not very many.
Did you feel like a sense of sisterhood with the women who were in it with you?
Very much. It was really a supportive environment. And at the same time as I joined in 1980, there was a lawsuit by a group of women against the State Department, which they won on discrimination, basically in promotions and assignments and kind of across the board for most of the 70s. So this group of women was also really determined to support women coming in. It was really special.
That is
Very,
so
very
cool.
Yeah, very, very special.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's a great segue into the next question because, as two women, we're really curious as to your experiences from a gendered perspective during your career. Were there challenges you faced unique to women during your time working for the Foreign Service? And what advice do you have to other women hoping to pursue a career path similar to yours?
That's a great question because I've thought a lot about that. When I joined, I was 23. And I thought I'd do this for a few years and go home. My family in California, my mother always was, when are you coming home?
32 years later.
32 years
Like, where are you? What country are you in right now?
So it was only a short-term career. When I met my now husband was on both of our first assignments. And it was interesting, a really good friend of ours was our career counselor, and we were getting married. When we decided to get married, our career counselor said, it's going to be hard because we have very strict nepotism laws. Right. So it's going to be hard and a bit challenging for you. And, he said, well, we'll give it a shot.
Yeah.
And
it worked out.
It worked out. It worked out quite well. And again, because of the support of a lot of colleagues too,
Sure,
who said, we're going to make this work and support you in doing this. So I forgot the second part of your question.
No. What advice would you give, if you're a woman entering Foreign Service, it can be a little daunting,
Yes.
I do feel still in this time frame, even though we're, kind of in a more modern era, there's that fear that you're entering a career path that it can feel a little patriarchal sometimes. What advice do you have to women in navigating that kind of those situations that you might feel, a little afraid to stand your ground? You kind of want to take a more nuanced perspective, like how do you navigate being a woman and having that gendered perspective? And has it helped you in any way? Do you feel like being a woman in that kind of career path?
The short answer to the last part of your question is yes, honestly. I think I have to say I maybe been very fortunate. I really have not had any significant difficulties working as a woman in either the State Department or the Foreign Service. Part of the beauty of the Foreign Service is you have an entering class, and then, at a lot of the almost intern staff assistant levels, these sort of the more lower. I have a group of friends, women friends, and some guys too, of course, but women friends from that time. And we've it's been a sisterhood, really, throughout that experience. So I've been the only woman in a lot of situations. And, sometimes there's a joke about it. But I've been really treated professionally quite well. And, now, we've had 2 women secretaries of state. In the Middle East Bureau, which you'd think of traditionally a male, we have a woman assistant secretary right now. There's been previous women. I hope and think we've gone beyond the specific gender issues. Now the issues are a little bit more complicated. Family, people, of different sexual or gender orientations, how you manage all those kinds of things. But I hope that our experience in dealing with the gender will help us as we go forward with this.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Create a precedent for the rest of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's great.
Yeah.
So we touched on it a little bit earlier about your experience at Stanford. Do you feel that your education readied you for what was to come? And is there a specific course or moment from your instruction at Stanford you remember pulling from during your career?
Yes, in many ways. I want to say to all of those questions, yes, first of all, being surrounded, that was I was born in Iowa, grew up in Southern California. Stanford, I think, was one of the first times I met people really of an international background. And even if they were what we'd call now a hyphenated American, Chinese American, Japanese American, whatever it was, it was the first time I was really exposed to people who had an international perspective. And being in the program really gave me a whole new perspective on the world. The simulation, strangely enough, I go back to that, it really taught me a lot about personal dynamics, the importance of working as a team, how you manage sometimes difficult, strong personalities, how you, because we had to work together and then also negotiate with the other side. So it kind of gave me an experience in what government might be like.
Yeah.
You can't get everything you want, but you try to advance your particular goals and objectives, and so that was a great experience.
Yeah, I found that in different clubs and kind of those simulations you were talking about. That's where I felt the most passionate about what I wanted to do.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so I really relate to that, and I also think that it prepares you for like being able to sometimes put yourself aside to try and get the whole of the situation done and be able to deal with people so different from you. And for me personally, that has really helped me as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I also feel I used to live abroad in East Africa. My dad is originally from there. And I think what you mentioned about just being abroad and having those experiences teach you about yourself, I mean, I feel one of the biggest educators for me was being around people that were nothing like me, looked nothing like me, spoke nothing like me, because they taught me so much about myself.
Of course.
So I definitely feel that there is a similar pattern in that. The more that you reach out, the more you connect with other people, the more that you kind of understand yourself. And we have a question kind of along that train of thought. In a lecture I attended, a professor of mine discussed the cross-disciplinary characteristics of intelligence, foreign service, and cultural anthropology. He shared with us a particularly moving quote: "He who seeks to understand the other comes to understand themselves." Along that sentiment, was there anything your time working overseas taught you about yourself as an individual that you can really pick out specifically?
It's funny, just when you were giving that your past anecdote about your experience, what I found sometimes about my experience overseas, it's humbling. It really is humbling to, first of all, to have to be able to have this experience. I mean, how lucky, right? And how fortunate we are in our country. Representing America in many of the places we lived was humbling. I mean, it's really, I think I felt a certain responsibility, really, and pride. And I found people, I'm often asked about working as a woman in the Middle East, similar to what you did. I've never encountered either animosity as a woman at all. A lot of respect, not a negative experience. And there would be people with whom we'd have extremely difficult discussions about foreign policy issues or differences in views on whatever. But then you would sit down and have dinner and start talking about your families and the local culture experience or whatever it was. So, humbling, I think, would be the humbling and proud.
Yeah, of course. And it's so interesting to think that even though you could be thousands of miles apart from somebody, when you meet them, there's so many things that are similar, I feel like the human experience, those things that you share, they connect just like a shared meal, You might have such a different cultural background, such a different educational background, but, everyone loves a good meal,
Right.
Everyone, I feel like, dreams, has these passions, these desires. So I definitely could see how those things are humbling when you start to be around and engage with people that you thought maybe would be much different from you, but they tend to be pretty similar.
Yeah, I think food and art can fix any wound.
And it's so interesting. I was a history focus in my international relations. I initially thought I was going to be a history major until I got involved in simulation and other classes. But I always kind of have come to my experience, especially in the Middle East, with a historical perspective. And I think which developed into a passion for art as well. But people really appreciate that when you have a historical recollection. You recognize the art or the period. You appreciate that this artistic influence, came from this area or whatever. They very much appreciate it.
That's actually.
So I think food and art, you're 100% right.
Yeah.
100% right.
That was actually one of my questions. When you're in these crisis management situations, do you feel that your background with art actually helped you in these moments?
It's funny when I think about, you would ask me about the classes, what were incredible experiences for me. Of course, the simulation classes in my major and some great professors I had there. But in my freshman year, one of my dorm mates dragged me to a course in the history of art. Mm-hmm. And this professor, first of all, sadly passed away a few years ago. He was a real showman, so he was a great lecturer. And he loved Rodin, the sculptor.
Yeah.
And I often thought I learned so much from him, just being exposed to the history of art, mostly Renaissance on, not further back.
Yeah.
Which is why I went back to school later to get that perspective. But just to have that perspective, it was really, really important. Crisis management is tough, That's a whole different. Spent a lot of time in crisis management situations. But yes, I think it really does help. Yeah, very, very much.
Amazing.
And I'm sure in your time overseas, you got to see some great art pieces, perhaps any exhibits, any pieces that you can remember in any of your times overseas that you really kind of hone in on and a good memory?
Do you know, yes, 3 in particular, and it would not be probably what you expect. Most people expect me to reference Egypt because Egypt has,
of course,
everything from they invented everything. And
yeah,
started everything.
3,000 years of art.
But our first post as a married couple was Syria. And it was it was the first time I'd ever really lived in a kind of a really strict state.
Of course.
When our phones were bugged and, we had lots of security around. But we were able to travel everywhere in the country. And I remember first going to the mosque in Damascus, which started as a church, then became a mosque, and is like, it's more Byzantine. It's more
beautiful.
It's really, really beautiful and a really historic, incredible place. And I remember just thinking, wow, I'm not sure I can comprehend everything that's here, all the influences, all the people who've been here, everything that's happened. Aleppo was the same way.
Yeah.
When we went to Aleppo, this really historic city. So we were really pleased to see that. When we were in Pakistan, too, one of the guys in the embassy took us out to an area which I had never heard of as Gandhara, which is like in the middle of nowhere now, But it turned out, this great civilization influenced by Alexander the Great, some of the first images of Buddha. I remember thinking, what? In the middle of Pakistan?
Right.
So this is really, so those kinds of experiences, yes, remember. And sadly, many of them are not Syria, certainly not available to us in our lifetime. Hopefully someday you guys can get there. But
hopefully,
yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for talking about Syria. I'm a Lebanese American, and I'm from northern Lebanon, and I have a lot of family from Syria as well. And it's really great to hear people not just talking about violence in the Middle East, having something good to say as well about the Middle East. And there's a big misconception, especially I feel with our generation because we're post 9/11.
I mean, of course. Look at what you've seen, right? Yeah.
So when I tell people my family's Lebanese, there's definitely like, oh, are you okay?
Yeah.
So it's nice to just hear that there are people who have seen the beauty of the Middle East and are happy to share that. So thank you.
Yeah, do you know, to me, one of the saddest things about the current situation in Syria especially is between when we were in Egypt, so the early 2000s and a little bit beyond, there was a lot of, when Syria sort of went through its more open period, a lot of restoration being done on the street called Straight, the old area of Damascus. Some of these beautiful old homes they were making into small, hotels or little art museums. So sadly, hopefully,
Yes.
someday we
Hopefully.
can all get back there to see some of that beauty.
Building on that area, while I was doing some research, we found that you were involved with Hands Along the Nile.
Yes.
And I just wanted to build on that a little bit, see what
Yes.
that relationship was like
Yes.
and how that cross-cultural interaction was for you.
Well, Hands Along the Nile is in some ways very similar to AUC for me because of our time in Egypt. And I had actually studied for a while at AUC. We just had the 100th anniversary of AUC, so it was founded in the 1920s by Americans who wanted to, missionaries at the time, but really were more focused on the liberal arts education and bringing liberal arts education to the Middle East, similar to AUB.
Yeah.
About the same time as AUB. Hands Along the Nile is a similar sort of thing. I think we're in our 45th year, 40th some years in Egypt, and it's an NGO really working on developing partnerships with Egyptians and Americans. We do a lot of support in communities, grants, loans, support groups for just, very hospitals, community-based work that is trying to give people more of an opportunity to, to make a living and have a decent life. We had a great hands trip to Egypt a few years ago, and we witnessed two terrific projects in an area of it's called Upper Egypt, so down, which is traditionally in the last 30 years been a source of conflict, especially between Christians and Muslims.
Yeah.
So we went to one. I'm trying to remember whether we were in just a regular building, but it was a sort of a group that was fostering dialogue between Christian and Muslim youth. Yeah. And so they kind of grown up with a lot of misconceptions about each other, even though they were in similar communities not far from each other. So just a dialogue. Yeah. And that sounds kind of silly and but it was really impactful and powerful.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And then we do a lot of what they call small grants to particularly women. Women have like almost 100% repayment rate. So we give them a grant. They start a business. They pay it back. They grow their business. We give them, so it's just like, and it's so cool to see. Do you know one of the biggest businesses women run in this area that we visited? Renting wedding dresses, clothes, right? So they build like a little inventory and have them rent them out for people. And actually, it's a great idea. And you think about you spend on wedding things and never wear it again, right? And so these women would just build these little businesses, all sorts of kinds of things. It was really, really wonderful to see.
That's incredible.
That is amazing.
My that side of the family is from Pakistan, and one thing I always remember growing up, the Pakistani weddings, the dresses are incredibly elaborate.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's
unbelievable.
A week-long celebration, and then it keeps going.
Truly amazing.
I can imagine that would be a very lucrative business.
Think about it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's great.
It's really nice. Yeah,
that's incredible.
I feel that the farther you go east, the better weddings get. In my experience.
Big fan.
Maybe I'm a little biased, but
I love it. And in Pakistan, especially when we would have like Pakistani weddings, they would have the food in this huge platter, and people would just gather around to eat, and you'd be talking with extended family from the first cousin, second cousin, third. Cousins that you didn't even know you had. And I feel like those were some of my best memories, and I always think of the dresses, and that's something that even when I moved to the United States, I always missed. I love an American wedding. I'm a big fan of the big poofy white dresses, but there's something so incredibly moving about seeing a dress that has such ornate design, such incredible,
and often been in the family.
The journey,
it's just, one of our first weekends in Pakistan, we were invited to a wedding, kind of the embassy as officially, not. I remember we went to this incredible. And they said, "Oh, this is just the first night. We've got 2 more days."
I love it. It's it's incredible. It's a parade. Parade. And I feel like it really does set the couple off in such a great manner. Everyone comes together, community members. It's such a great experience.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You mentioned grants and funding, and I wanted to bring up, in 2021, your family established the Welch Family Athletics Health and Wellness Current Use Counselor Fund with aims of supporting a second mental health position within the Department of Intercollegiate Athletes. You mentioned your commitment to supporting student athletes and their mental health, as well as championing the concept of cura personalis, or care of the whole person. Can you share with us what this term means to you in your own line of work, whether that be in your foreign service endeavors or your work with nonprofits and art programs?
No, that's a great question. My husband went to Georgetown.
Yes.
Is a passionate Georgetown supporter, and particularly Georgetown basketball,
Right.
which is on the way up. We're on the way up, but and literally we've had season tickets off and on for 40 plus years.
Wow.
So it's a wonderful commitment. Our youngest daughter, when she was in college, she really struggled with her mental health, and honestly, through the grace and support of her friends, some of her friends called her sisters, because her sisters had also gone to college there, and said, we're really worried about her. And she ended up being hospitalized for a while with a sort of an eating disorder that they called orthorexia, which is like obsessive, getting rid of anything not healthy in your diet to the point where you restrict yourself completely, and kind of over-exercising. And she had a wonderful treatment program, a wonderful counselor. She was at Stanford at the time. They were awesome about accommodating her. But we realized in her program, there were, in the treatment program, a lot of athletes. You've gone to high school, you've been the star, or whatever. You go to college and you don't play, right? Or you are not but maybe if I just restrict my food or work out more, I can be good. I can, be back on the top again. So when we started working with the Georgetown basketball program, they identified a real need for general mental health support in athletics across the board, not just anything related particularly to, but family situations, struggles and adjusted in college, whatever it is. So we were really pleased to support that. Interestingly, our youngest, who did go through that real tough period, is a clinical psychologist now.
Wow.
Treating adolescents and kids. So
That's incredible.
So it's really been a great journey for her. We're so proud of her and proud of the work she's doing.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, that's really inspiring to hear. UCF has a really comprehensive mental health support program, and I know that both me and Farah have probably, have had friends with similar struggles, and just knowing that someone is willing to be open and talk about it, especially in this hustle culture these days. All of us are expected to be like on the top of our game, perfect all of the time. So
Constantly producing. No, of course. And I definitely.
I was going to say we support a similar program at AUC where the culture is even, it's just not
that taboo.
Right. It's a little
course.
taboo, although it's getting much better. I think the world, it's really such a positive thing that we're, supporting and being and understanding and trying to help people. So, let's hope then. Yeah.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much. We've covered so much material here today, and I'm sure listeners are fascinated with your time overseas, as well as your personal endeavors in the realms of art, education, and cross-cultural integration. This might be hard, but if you were to take a snapshot of one moment of your career just to close off, what would you choose?
Oh, boy. I had so many great experiences. I mean, a really tough and great. And can I do two?
Oh, you can definitely do two.
When we were in Syria, it was a tough time in the Middle East. There were a lot of hijackings. And there was a TWA flight hijacked in Beirut, and there were a number of American hostages held on the flight. And through this complex series of negotiations, we were able to get the hostages out and into Syria. So my husband went with a couple other colleagues from the embassy to the border in the middle of the night, to meet them. It was one of these classic
movie scenes.
Yes, and a group of us was waiting at the Sheraton in Damascus for the group to come. And of course, this group was traumatized, you know.
For sure.
And they walked in, and just seeing the looks on their face when they realized we're free, you know, we're home. It was just so moving. And no cell phones or anything then.
Yeah.
So we were trying to get a line for them to call their families, you know. It was really, so that was a really extraordinary moment. I have to say. And then the other one was, it was very sort of happenstance when I was the Olympic coordinator in London. And working with so many wonderful colleagues in the security world at the embassy and with the Olympics and our sponsors. I just have to say it was the same thing. I was escorting, Mrs. Obama was our representative to the opening ceremonies, and she was at the palace with all that group. And I took the rest of the delegation out to the park. And it was so, people were so excited. You know, these amazing, you know, renowned athletes and prominent people that were just like, the excitement and the pride and being, you know, part of the American.
Yeah, every time the Olympics comes on, I put on my Eagle hat. I'm ready. Yeah. It's all about the U.S.
I have to say, it was much more extraordinary. I didn't expect it to be as great as it was. So.
That's incredible.
Anyway, so I think those are two things. And then just so many professional colleagues around the world, both foreign diplomat friends, colleagues, and as I said, some of the colleagues we worked with over the years really were the thing I would take away more than anything else.
Wow.
And I wish you guys incredible success. I'm excited for you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that.
Wow. Mrs. Welch, thank you so much for talking to us today. All of us here are inspired by your work in the Foreign Service, the dedication you have shown to the international community, and building bridges between the United States and the global community.
Yes, we've had such a fruitful discussion surrounding your impressive career overseas, as well as your efforts to champion art and education here on the home front. This has been Farah Shah and Abigail English from UCF's Office of Global Perspectives and International Initiatives.
Make sure to stay up to date with all of our events and initiatives by visiting our website, ucfglobalperspectives.org. That is ucfglobalperspectives.org. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.